All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael. I'm a generalist solicitor at the Hunter Community Legal Center. And before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are. Here in Newcastle, we are on Awabakal and Worimi land. And I pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that this land was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander participants who might be present at today's session. To start off with, the Hunter Community Legal Center is a not-for-profit organization which provides free legal advice and information to anyone who lives, works, and studies in the Hunter region. The information that's provided in this session is for information purposes only. It should not be relied upon as legal advice. You should seek individual legal advice for your own particular circumstances if you need it. The information provided in this session is current as of today, the 31st of March, 2021, and relates to New South Wales laws in Australia only. It must not be relied upon for issues arising in any other state in Australia or in any country outside Australia, and that you would need to seek legal advice from a legal practitioner in those jurisdictions if you need more assistance. And finally, this presentation and the slides and recording will be provided to you after this session and can be viewed and stored only by you, the participants. It must not be published and or distributed via any form of media, and you should seek specific consent from the Hunter Community Legal Center to publish and or distribute this resource to any other person. Okay, so that takes care of the general stuff. I'd also like to say in relation to the Community Legal Center is today we'll be talking about road and transport in New South Wales, but we provide a variety of advice on different things outside of this, including domestic violence, criminal matters, AVOs, property matters, family law. There's a whole range of advice. So if you do have any legal questions, you do feel free to get in contact with us in relation to those if you need free legal advice. But as I said today, we're going to be focusing and talking about road and transport law in New South Wales. And when we're talking about what will be the topics we'll be hitting on today are about driver licensing in New South Wales, vehicle registration and insurance, the road rules. When we're not going to be going over all of the road rules, there's many of them, but we'll just be going over some very specific things about what happens, particularly if you do not obey the road rules. Issues with police and driving, and the RMS, which is the Roads and Maritime Service, as they are the body responsible for providing driver's licenses in New South Wales, and for then following up on traffic infringements and the road rules. So those are the main things that we'll be talking about today. Again, this is just very general information. If you do have specific issues revolving your matter, you'd need to call in. The first thing we're going to talk about is driver licensing. Everyone who drives in New South Wales or in any part of Australia requires a valid driver's license. Now, if you are an international student or you've come from overseas, it is possible that your license will be recognized here in Australia and that you could use that license to drive with. We would strongly suggest that even if you're coming from overseas and have an overseas license, you should get in touch with Services New South Wales or the Roads and Maritime Service and see about applying for a New South Wales driver's license. Although a foreign license will be good for some period of time, that it's best if you can have a New South Wales license. If you have a foreign driver's license, you must carry that all times when you're driving, and you must carry an authorized English translation of that license if it is in a foreign language or a foreign script. So those are important things to remember. You cannot drive at all if you do not have a driver's license. in most cases, if you plan to be here for more than 6 months, you definitely need to apply for a New South Wales license. In New South Wales, there is a process that you go through to get a license. You start off by taking a test, and then you obtain your L plates or your learner's license. And there are a number of restrictions that go along with these learners and provisional licenses. As you're applying, you must be aware of what those are and how they work, because they're different. You start with your L's, you'll then move to your P1s, or what's often referred to as your red Ps, and then you move to your P2s or your green Ps. Now, you will notice this as if you are driving or you're on the streets, you will frequently see cars, and next to their registration plates, you will see a big L, a black L on a yellow black background. That would be an L plate driver. You would see a red P, or you would see a green P next to the license. That indicates the driver of that vehicle has that type of license. And that's important is because if you have that type of license, you must have that plate on your car next to your rego plates at all times. So that's important, is the people on the road need to identify you depending on what kind of license that you are using, and the police will also identify you. It is often unfortunate, though, is if you do have P plates on your car, is you will often find that the police will pull you over for a variety of different reasons. Once you've gone through that whole process, you will receive your full license. That's what we call a black license. And after you've had your license for a period of time, you can then obtain a gold, what's called a gold license. Now, it's important to make sure that you understand that process as you go through it, because there are, again, different requirements for each of those licenses. In relation to each of those, the other processes is there are a number of tests that you have to take, both written tests and driving tests. And there's a number of hours that you have to spend and log on the road before you can move from one type of license to the next license. Now, if you are a holder of a foreign driver's license that's accepted here in Australia and New South Wales, you can still apply for a New South Wales, and you may be able to skip some of those steps depending on the type of license and where you got that license. Regardless of where you come from, you will always have to take a written test and a driving test before you can get a license from the Roads and Maritime Service. Now, once you have a license, there's a lot of responsibilities. Number one is you need to know all of the road rules, and you shouldn't be driving unless you know all of the road rules. But one of the important things is that there is no such thing as saying, well, it wasn't my fault or I didn't know. The responsibility of holding a driver's license means that you must be aware of what the road rules are where you are driving, and you must be aware of whose car you're driving and whether that car is validly registered and insured like it should be. So, for example, if you borrow somebody else's car and then you're pulled over and the police say, do you realize that the registration on this car was out of date and it has no insurance? Then you will have to pay a fine for driving a car that is unregistered and uninsured. You can't just say to the police, oh, it's a friend's car, I just borrowed this. You are required as a license holder to check with whoever's car that it is validly registered and validly insured. You have to make sure it's suitable to drive also. So it's extremely important that you make sure before you get into any car that you know what you're driving, whose car it is you're driving, and that you are aware of the road rules in the location that you're at, okay? The other important thing about the responsibilities of a license is, again, the road rules vary. For example, speed limits. Speed limits change and can change from one local council area to another local council area. So while some local councils may have for residential streets a 50-kilometer-hour speed limit. Some council areas have high pedestrian activity areas where the speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. You must not assume that you know what the speed limit is. It is your responsibility to pay very close attention to the street signs and the speed limit of those signs and follow all of those signs. When you are driving a car, the other thing about having the license is you have to make sure that that license is with you. You cannot say, oh, I left it, it's back at home, because that is an offense to drive without a license. And you will find yourself with a hefty fine and a possible suspension, and if you don't have your license. So you must always take your license. So even if in your country, if you get pulled over for driving without a license, it might be possible that that fine could be waived if you can show that you have a driver's license. That is not the case in New South Wales. You must have the license on you when you're driving. The other issue now is that the New South Wales Roads and Maritime Service have the possibility for you to have an electronic license on your telephone. I would strongly advise you that that is not a substitute for a plastic license that you keep in your wallet or handbag or whatever. So even though you may have your license on your phone, it is important that you should take your actual physical driver's license with you. Now, as we were talking about, the most important responsibility of having a license is knowing the road rules and making sure that you obey and follow all of the road rules. All of the road rules are on the Roads and Maritime Service website. You can go to that website and get a full list of all of the road rules. And there are a number of handbooks that you can obtain, both online and from the RMS, that include the road rules and will include a lot of illustrations or pictures about those road rules. So again, it's very important that you have a very good knowledge of what those road rules are, because it's not good enough to say, I didn't know that was a rule, or I didn't know that, okay? It's especially important to pay attention to rules that if you come from somewhere else, you're not familiar with. For example, rules about a roundabout. Roundabout rules vary from country to country. So you need to make sure that you understand what the rules about approaching a roundabout in Australia are, because quite frankly, most Australians don't know what the road rules about approaching a roundabout are. So it's really important for those areas that are at high risk of having an accident, such as an intersection or road or a roundabout. It's very important that you have a good understanding of what those rules are. Now, once you have a license, the one that if you break a road rule, then one of the things that goes along with that is each rule has a certain amount of what we call demerit points that go along with that. And each of your licenses, your different licenses, whether it be your learner's plate, a red P, a green P, or a full license, carries a different number of demerit points that you can obtain or get before the RMS considers taking your license away. So with the demerit points, everybody starts with 0. So you have a license, you have 0 demerit points. If you are then found breaking a road rule and you are given a penalty notice or a fine for breaking that road rule, then demerit points come with that. Those demerit points are added onto your license. When you get to a certain number of demerit points, it's at that point the RMS can and usually will suspend your license. Obviously, the number of demerit points are lower for the learners and provisional licenses than they are for a full license. But you need to be aware of how many points they are. It is important to notice that for your red Ps and your green Ps is that almost any speeding offense by a P-plater will result in enough demerit points to suspend that license. Okay, that's not the case with all traffic offenses or traffic fines, but with speeding, if you're on your P plates, you will almost surely receive a notice from the RMS that you're about to lose your license. So each of these will have varying demerit points, all the way from 1 demerit point up to 8 demerit points, and they can add up quite quickly. You can often find that you can get more than one offense at one time. So you can quickly go from one driving session and acquiring up to 6, 8 demerit points in that one session, depending on what rules that you have broken. So it isn't difficult to get points. So you need to be very aware of what the rules are. And it's also important to remember that often the number of demerit points you get for a traffic offense can be doubled at certain times of the year. And for example, this weekend coming up, this Easter holiday weekend will be a double demerit point weekend. So starting tomorrow, any offenses that you might be fined for while driving, you will get double the demerit points. So you could see that if you have, for example, a fine that takes 4 demerit points, that would take you up to 8 demerit points. If you have a full license, you're already over half of the maximum demerit points that you can get. So it's particularly important, especially on long weekends, holiday periods, particularly holiday periods around school breaks. There will always be double demerit points. You must know when those are, because you can't say again, oh, I didn't know it was double demerit point weekend. You can't, once the demerit points are placed on your record, they only come off after a certain period of time that you've had those points. Okay, and if you have a number of traffic offenses one after the other, so you get one year and then 6 months later you get another one, the points come off from when you get the offense, not at the end of a particular year. So it's important that those points will remain on your license for quite some time. Now, if you get a certain number of points, as we said, then you can lose, the RMS will automatically suspend your driver's license. Now, how they do that is you accumulate the points, the RMS goes on their system, and then they will send you a letter that says that you are about to lose your points for your license for demerit points. They will give you a particular time when that's going to happen. They usually give you about 28 days when you're going to do that. There are some things that you can do about that, and I'll come back to that. But if you are notified by the RMS that you're losing your license, and from the date that that notice is in effect, you must not drive. Your license is suspended and you cannot drive for the period of that suspension. If you are caught driving while suspended, things just get worse and you will lose your license for even a longer period of time. In New South Wales, most police cars, definitely all highway patrol cars, but most police cars have cameras in them that automatically read your rego plate. So the police don't even have to be looking at you. If it pops up that your registration plate is associated with a driver's license of the same name, they will pull that vehicle over. And if it is you that is driving, and they will know that you are suspended. And you won't be able to say, I didn't know, I thought I could drive. You will be then taken off the road for even a longer period of time. Many people don't realize is that they are suspended because they say, I never got the suspension notice. It is a law, it is a requirement that you must notify the RMS of any change of address within 2 weeks of changing that address. So if you move somewhere, and often students will move from share house or to another place, you must notify the RMS within 2 weeks of moving, because it is not an excuse to say, I moved, I did not get the suspension notice. That will not hold up with the RMS or the court, and you will likely find, again, that you've now got an even longer disqualification period on your license. So if you are moving, make sure that you notify the RMS. That can all be done quite easily online, but it is very important that you notify them. Now, if you receive a suspension notice from the RMS, then there are a number of things that you can do. Now, it's first of all very important to remember two things, is that having a traffic offense and the fine for that offense and the demerit points that you collect on your license are very different things. We often hear people say, I just got a speeding fine and I can't do this, I can't take the speeding fine because I will have too many demerit points and I'll lose my license. So I'm going to take the speeding fine to court. That is not going to help you. The court has no power over demerit points. It cannot reduce demerit points or change demerit points. So if you have an issue that you may lose your license because of demerit points, then you need to get legal advice, call us, because avoiding a suspension for demerit points is very different than fighting a particular traffic offense. They're two very different things. So it's important to remember that, because if you say you got a fine for speeding, and then you say, I elect to take that fine to court, well, first of all, it is extremely difficult to fight a speeding fine in court because the police will have recorded you on some kind of device, or a camera will have recorded you. Those cameras and those devices are very accurate, and it will be extremely difficult to say that you weren't speeding. So you go to court, you spend that time in court, you get a day off of work or a day out of school, you waste a whole day there to only find out that you still have to pay the fine, you still have the demerit points, and you're still about to lose your license. So if you are worried about losing your license for demerit points for a particular fine, please get legal advice in relation to that. Do not elect to take it to court automatically. But if you do have, you get a notice from the RMS that you are about to be suspended, you should still get some advice from us, but there are some options that you can get, including if you are a provisional license holder, a red P or a green P license holder, you can make an application to the court to appeal your suspension, which would then allow you often to continue driving, or possibly having the suspension reduced down from, let's say, 3 months to 1 month. So those are options that are available, so you can be off of the road for a less period of time. If you're a full license holder and you're about to lose your license for demerit points, there's also the option of what's called a good behavior license, but there are a lot of very detailed points around that, which if you do not follow that and you offend during the good behavior period, could find that you're off the road for even longer than if you'd served the original suspension. So again, with all of those options, it's probably best to contact us beforehand to see how what you should be doing. But a suspension notice from the RMS does not mean that you will automatically lose your license. There are options, and you need to get advice in relation to those. Now, when you commit a traffic offense, or if you do commit a traffic offense, almost all of them are dealt with usually by fines. So what happens is what you will be given either through the mail or by the police directly if they pull you over is you'll be given what's called a penalty notice. All right, and the penalty notice is the form of a fine. It tells you what was the road rule that you broke. It tells you what the fine is for breaking that road rule, and it will usually tell you what the demerit points are for breaking that road rule. The fines vary depending on where it occurs, what type of offense it is. So obviously a speeding fine for going over the speed limit by less than 10 kilometers an hour the fine is less than going over the speed limit by 20 kilometers an hour. So the fines vary depending on each. What is important to remember also is that the fine you get on a penalty notice is not the maximum fine that you can be given. It is usually somewhere kind of in between. So many people will say, oh, I'm going to take this to court, not realizing that if you take it to court and you're unsuccessful, the magistrate may actually give you the maximum fine, which is more than the original penalty notice. So the fines that you see on the penalty notice are often less than the maximum fine. When you do receive a penalty notice, the penalty notices are followed up by the Revenue Office of New South Wales. All right, so even if you get a fine by the police, it is Revenue who will be the people enforcing that fine or following up on that fine. The same goes for a parking fine. If you get a parking fine in a council, the council will issue the parking fine, but Revenue will be the one to follow up that parking fine. Speed cameras or other camera detected road things will go through the RMS, but are followed up by Revenue. So once you get your penalty, you should get your penalty notice. Like I said, if it's the police, sometimes the police will give you a penalty notice right there on the spot. Other times they will tell you, we will send you a penalty notice in the mail. When you get your penalty notice, you need to read it. That's the most important thing, because you need to check, is this me? Did I do this? Okay. Because sometimes there can be confusion. This is most particularly in relation to camera detected offenses. So if you have given your car to somebody else and they drove it past a speed camera and they got caught for speeding, is that fine will be sent to you as the registered owner. It is then your responsibility to inform RMS that you were not the driver. You'll have to go on the RMS website and that will tell you how to do that. But again, it's important that if you own a vehicle and you've registered that vehicle, you should not give your car or let anybody drive it unless you know them very, very well. And you should also make sure that they have a driver's license and that they can drive that car. Right? So do not give your car to just anyone, because they could drive it around, rack up hundreds of dollars in fines, and then take off. You don't know where they are. You have no idea how to get a hold of them. Even though you are not the driver, you can be held responsible for those fines. And if you cannot locate the driver and provide evidence that it was somebody else driving, you cop the points for those offenses also. So if you have a car registered in your name, I would very strongly advise you to never let anybody drive that car unless you know them very well. Now, when you first get a penalty notice, the penalty notice will give you 21 days to pay. That's the time you need to decide what to do. Was this you? Do you agree with it? And on the penalty notice, there will be tell you what you need to do or how you can deal with that penalty notice. More often than not, you'll have to pay the fine. You have 21 days from receiving that penalty notice to decide what to do. If you forget or you don't, you will receive a penalty reminder notice. So basically it says now you've got 28 more days to decide what to do, and you must use those 28 days and either pay or follow up, elect to take it to court. So it's important that you follow up by then, because if after the penalty reminder notice, you still haven't paid, then an enforcement order will be put into place. And that means that you have to pay. You can no longer elect to go to court. You can no longer say, oh, wait, it wasn't me, or I wasn't the driver. It's too late at that point, and very difficult to have an enforcement order put aside. And an enforcement order will also increase cost on top of whatever the original penalty was. So do not wait until it's too late. As soon as you get a penalty notice, if you've got questions, you can call the Community Legal Center and get some answers about those specific questions. If it was you and you realize, well, I have to pay the fine, pay it or make arrangements to pay it, but do not wait too long, because if you do get an enforcement order, it makes it very, very difficult to change anything or in relation to that fine. In relation to paying a fine is if you can't pay the fine all at one time, you can organize to pay by installments. And for large fines, you can talk with revenue about entering into what's called a work development order. And that's a way to pay off fines by doing a variety of different things. People think it's like you have to do some work to pay off the fine. That's not always the case. There's a lot of different things you can do to get your fine reduced through a work development order. So if you have a lot of fines, it's best to talk to revenue about the possibility of getting onto a work development order. Now, if you receive a fine or a penalty notice, it's important to understand is that traffic offenses are what we call strict liability offenses. Now, what that means is it doesn't make any difference whether you meant to break the law or not, is that you did it. And if you did, you have to pay the fine. You cannot fight it in court. So it is not enough to say, well, the last sign I saw said it was the speed limit was 100 kilometers an hour. And now you're telling me, well, it's 60 kilometers an hour. Well, I didn't see the sign. Doesn't make any difference. You are responsible for looking at the signs. You have to see it. It's strict liability. If it was 60 kilometers an hour and the police or a camera caught you going faster than that, you are responsible for the fine. All right. So again, it doesn't make any difference whether you meant to do it, is if you did it or not. And if you did it, the general advice is you need to just pay the fine and deal with it from there, because it is extremely difficult to fight a traffic offense in court. You would have to have a lot of evidence to show that you did not commit the offense. So example, with camera detected offenses, a lot of people will say, well, wait, hold on, that camera said I was going 80 kilometers an hour in a 60 zone. No, I know I wasn't going that fast. Well, unless you have some evidence to show that, or unless you have the money to hire an expert to say that the camera wasn't working correctly, which would cost you thousands of dollars to get an expert to do, you cannot fight that fine. So it's very difficult to say I wasn't going that fast. The cameras are very sensitive and they are usually very accurate. So you have to be very careful in relation to those, is that you cannot fight a fine. If you have questions about whether or not you actually committed an offense, then you should certainly call us to find out whether or not there is a chance to then elect to take that to court, because that is one of the options with a fine. If you're not going to pay it, you can elect to take it to court. Now, the reasons why you would elect to take it to court is, number one, you don't believe you're guilty. But before you do that, please call and get advice, because the laws are very technical and they are very difficult to get around. And people often think they watch TV and they think, oh, well, they spelled my name wrong on the penalty notice, so I should be able to get out of it. That's not how it works. It's not like TV. All right. Those things can be addressed and changed in court, and you're still stuck with the fine. So you're not going to get off on a technicality, as you see on television. So if you have a question about whether or not you actually committed an offense, you should check with us first. Now, in some cases, people may elect to take a fine to court because the fine is very large, and there's the possibility that at court, the magistrate in the local court could reduce the fine. That's a possibility, but there's no guarantees with that. And again, you should call us beforehand to talk about that, because even if you have a high fine, as we said, there's ways to pay around that or get a work development order. Also, people will elect to go to court, as I said, because they're worried about losing demerit points. Well, if that's the case, you're not going to elect to take that fine to court. You're going to have to look at options about having your suspension appealed or getting a good behavior license. So when you get your penalty notice, it's very important to know the date that you have to pay by, note that who is the driver or who they say the driver is, or if it's your vehicle. And if you have any questions, give us a call Do not automatically elect to take something to court because you disagree with it, you don't have the money to pay for it, or you're worried about losing your license. Because if you do elect to take a matter to court, there are court fees on top of any fine that you may have too. If you do get a penalty notice, one of the things that you can do is you can ask for a review. So if you believe that there are circumstances around the offense that happened, or the road rule that you broke, that you want revenue or the organization or agency that gave you the penalty notice, you can put that into writing to revenue and they will review it. All right, so that is one option you can always look at. If it is a traffic offense that is picked up either by a speed camera, or if it's an offense that the police have pulled you over for, unless you have an extremely good reason or you have a perfect driving record, your review is likely to be knocked back. In most cases, if you've got any previous infringements or offenses on your driving record from the past 10 years, it is unlikely that you will get a successful review. So you have to have a squeaky clean driving record if you hope to get any consideration for a review. Reviews are more often helpful in the matter of parking fines, because often with parking fines, there are some other circumstances around that that may you may want them to consider. So with parking fines, you'll often find that you have a better chance of being successful on a review than you will be on an actual traffic fine or a driving fine. So you can look into that. Ask how you do a review. You can do it all on the revenue website, and that will be explained to you on your penalty notice. So those are the things when you receive a fine or penalty notice, make sure you look at it. If you've got any questions about it, definitely give us a call. Pay attention to the time by which you have to pay or elect to go to court, and make sure you don't let that time go by. Now, you receive penalty notices and infringement notices for minor traffic offenses. So for certain speeding offenses, running a red light, traffic offenses like that, you'll just get a penalty notice for. But there are other serious driving offenses that, rather than getting a penalty notice, you will actually receive a court attendance notice. So they actually require you to go to court, not just to pay a fine. And these are serious driving offenses. And the reason that they have these is because after a certain number of serious driving offenses, you can lose your license for a considerable period of time. The serious driving offenses are, the first one and the most common one is drink driving. Do not drive after you've been drinking. I cannot emphasize that enough. People think, oh, well, I'll just have one drink, I'll be okay. One drink always turns into two drinks. People say, well, I'll have this drink, I'm having it with dinner. It is impossible to know how much alcohol is in any drink. And you will hear things saying, oh, you can have 2 drinks in the first hour and 1 drink after that. That is no guarantee that you will not exceed the limit. Every single person is different. Alcohol affects every person differently. If you are going to drive, our advice to you is do not drink. Do not drink one alcoholic drink. Just do not, if you're going to have any drinking at all, just do not drive. If you're going out, you've now got the opportunities for taxi, Uber, Lyft. You have all these different things that you can get somebody to drive you home. Do not take the risk of drinking and driving, because it is very serious and it is treated very seriously in New South Wales. So our advice is do not drink anything, any alcoholic drinks if you're going to drive. If you do drink, the reason we say don't do it at all is because there are very high chances that you will be caught. In Australia and in New South Wales, they do random breath testing. So that means that any police car anywhere can pull you over and randomly breath test you at any time. They do not need a reason to do that. So if you're driving a car and the police see you and decide they want to give you a random breath test, they can do that. In addition to that, you'll often see roadside breath testing. So that's where the police are pulling, they have a whole van and a number of cars and they're pulling people off the road and testing them. So there are all sorts of opportunities for the police to pull you over and test you. So even if you think, well, I won't get caught, or it's just, a kilometer down the road, do not take the chance. Now, if you're caught drink driving, they will test you at the roadside. That will give an estimate of how much alcohol that you may have in your system. They will then take you to either the van that they have there, or they will take you to the police station, and they will use a more accurate breathalyzer to determine the concentration of alcohol in your blood. There are different ranges. There's low, middle, and high, and the penalties for each of those differ depending on what they are. It is important to remember that if you are on a learner or provisional license, you cannot have any alcohol in your system. So even if you are not affected by the alcohol, if you show any in your system, you will lose your license. So if you are on a P plate and you plan to go out drinking, do not drive. Get somebody else to do the driving. Take an Uber, take a Lyft, take a taxi, walk. Do not drive, because you will lose your license and you'll lose it for a long period of time. So obviously the higher range of alcohol in your system, the more serious the offense is, and the more serious the fines, sentences, and disqualification periods where you will be off of the road. So, and these can also include the option of the court putting an interlock device on your car. That's a device where you have to put it on the car and you cannot drive it until you breathe into it. If you drink and you breathe into it, then you are committing an offense again and you will lose your license for even longer than you did before. So these are very serious offenses and you can lose your license. You can have your license disqualified for a long period of time. And with high range drink driving offenses, you can find yourself in jail. So do not drink and drive because the likelihood of getting caught is very high, and the loss of license, the risk of losing your license is also very high. Now, recently there has been a change for full license holders. If you've been caught drink driving and you're a low range drink driving, all right, then what they will do is they will just give you a fine on the spot. It used to be that you had to go to court for that, but with low range, they don't even do that anymore. They will give you a penalty notice, a fine on the spot, and they will take your license away and suspend it for 3 months automatically on the spot. So even a low range will result in you losing your license on the spot. So again, don't drink and drive. If you do have a low range drink driving matter and the police take your license off you at the time, there is the possibility to appeal that suspension, but you would need to call us and get further advice before you do that. It is also illegal in New South Wales to have an illicit or illegal drug in your system while you're driving. Now, this is a difficult one, is because it only has to be in your system. It's not how much is in your system, like with the alcohol, but it's anything that's in your system. If it's there, then you can be given an offense of driving with illicit substance in your system. Right? This is really important to remember because one of those illicit substances is THC, cannabis, pot. If you smoke, even one bong hit will result in you getting enough THC in your system, and that will stay in your system for weeks. So if you just do that once and you drive 2-3 weeks later, you can still get hit up for driving with illicit substance in your system. It is extremely important to keep that in mind, is it's not about whether or not your driving was affected, it's about whether you had it in your system. So if you do get caught with driving with illicit substance in your system, it would be important to get advice about that. The other issue to keep in mind with that is often they will send the test, they'll do an initial test to see whether you have it in your system, and then they'll do a further test and send it away. So it's quite possible that you do not get a penalty notice or you do not get a court attendance notice on the spot, but 4 months later, you get a court attendance notice in the mail because that's how long it's taken them to process the test. So it's extremely important that you keep that in mind. Is you might think, oh, I'm off the hook, but no, it's just a matter of the test having to go through the lab process and then coming back to the police, which could take months, and you could still find yourself in court. There's negligent driving. That's another series of driving offenses, and there's lots of different ranges for that. But keeping in mind that negligent driving involves a lot of different things. It can include something as simple as spinning your wheels out. So if the road is wet and the police are behind you and you drive and your wheels lose traction, there's a possibility that you could get hit up for negligent driving. There's also negligent driving that results in an accident where somebody is injured or even worse, killed. In those circumstances, you could find that those carry significant penalties and even jail sentences. So you need to get legal advice if you've been caught or charged with negligent driving. And then there's driving, the other serious offense is driving with a suspended or disqualified license. So if your license has been taken off of you because of points or some other reason for drink driving, and then you decide to drive without that license, well, then you're driving with a suspended or disqualified license, then you will find yourself in court looking at far more serious sentences, including potentially jail. Yes, in New South Wales, they put people in jail for driving with a disqualified license. So you need to be very careful about that. If you are suspended or you are disqualified from driving, do not drive because, as I said, the police cars have cameras in them and they will pick up license plates and pull people over if there's any association with a suspended or disqualified license. If you get a court attendance notice for a serious driving offense, it's important to call us and get advice about your specific matter. Just quickly, a thing about motor vehicle accidents. In Australia, all vehicles, when they're registered, must also pay for compulsory third-party insurance, or what's called a green slip. That insurance is for accidents involving injuries. So if you're in an accident and it involves an injury, then you must be reported to the CTP or green slip insurer for that car. It's important so every car on the road that's properly registered must have CTP insurance. So if there is an injury, then that insurance company can then deal with that injury. But people often mistake having CTP insurance for having insurance if you're in an accident where there is no injuries. CTP green slip insurance does not cover damage to a vehicle. So it only covers injuries for people involved in a motor vehicle accident, not damage to a vehicle. If you want insurance to protect you from damage to your vehicle or you causing damage to another person's vehicle, then you need to talk to an insurance company about that. We would strongly advise you to consider getting insurance for property damage to your car, either comprehensive insurance or what's also called third property insurance. So if you hit a car and it's your fault, that they can cover that. But green slip insurance only covers injuries. If you're involved in a motor vehicle accident and there are no injuries, then there is no purpose in calling the police because the police will not attend. And insurance companies are no longer required to have an event number from the police or a police report if you wish to make a complaint for property damage. Police will only arrive if it's a serious accident or it's an accident involving an injury. I would certainly say if you are in a car accident and you are injured in that car accident, it is important for you to get in touch with the green slip insurer of that car, because there are strict time limits on getting insurance coverage for an injury in a car accident. Now, at the Hunter Community Legal Center, we don't do any injury work, but there are many private solicitors in New South Wales that will do motor vehicle accidents where you're injured, and they often do that on a no-win, no-fee basis, so you don't have to pay them up front. But it's good to talk, if you're injured in a car accident, to talk to one of those types of solicitors, because there are very strict time limits about reporting an injury. If you are in an accident, it is a law that you must exchange details with the person that you were involved in the accident with. All right, so that includes your name, your address, your driver's license number, your vehicle registration plate, everything you must provide to the other party, and the other party must provide that to you. If you are involved in an accident and the other party isn't in the car, so for example, it's in a parking lot or the car is parked on the side of the road and you damage it, you are still required to place your details somewhere in the car where it can be found, so that person can contact you about the accident. If you hit another car and drive away, that is an offense, and you can be fined and lose your license for that, in addition to additional charges and fees for on top of what it would cost to repair the car. So if you accidentally hit a car, leave your details. All right. There may be a question if you're in a motor vehicle accident, who is at fault? Again, those can be difficult questions. In those cases, if you're not sure, you can certainly talk to us, but there are ways that you may find yourself in court because they believe that you're responsible or you believe they're responsible. Before you get to that state, please give us a call to talk about your particular situation. The other issue that you have to keep in mind is that if you've got insurance on your car, call your insurance company if you're in an accident. That's why you're paying them. So you call them, even if it's not your fault, you tell them what's happened. And then if it's not your fault, and your insurance company, will chase the other person for the money to repair your car. So it's important, if you've got insurance on your car, if you have an accident, report it to your insurer. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, no, I have my excess on my insurance is too much, I don't want to do that. That will always cause more trouble than it's worth. If you have insurance on your car, even if you have a high excess, you should report that to your insurer and have them deal with it. Right? If you have where somebody's hit your car and they don't have insurance, then you could certainly call us and get advice on how you can pursue them. You can also go on to the website for the Financial Rights Community Legal Center, and they have an excellent site on motor vehicle accidents and what you need to do in order to make a claim against somebody when it isn't your fault. Just quickly, as a bicycle rider, we've been talking about motor vehicles. If you're a bicycle rider, you also must obey the road rules. You're required to obey the road rules. You also must make sure you have a helmet, that you've got lights if you're traveling at night, and that if you're a bicycle rider and you don't obey the road rules, you can also find yourself in trouble and getting a penalty notice for not obeying the road rules. Just because you're not in a car doesn't mean that you can get out of getting a penalty. And believe it or not, this can include driving under the influence of alcohol. So don't think, well, I'm going out drinking, so I'll take my bike tonight, because that might not get you off the hook. Because driving a bike while intoxicated can be just as dangerous as driving a car, particularly for yourself. So you can check on, again, you must obey all the road rules if you're riding your bicycle. If you are riding a bicycle and a car hits you, or you're injured in an accident involving a car, again, you need to get the details of that vehicle. And if you're injured particularly, you can make a claim to their CTP insurer. We do have discrimination up here, but this is just in relation to issues that may arise somewhat about getting a license. You should not be discriminated in relation to getting a license, but if you have any of those issues, you can certainly get in contact with us. And then finally, here are some sites where you can get some help. When this is available, you can click on those links and that will give you more information and on where you can get help in relation to that. Otherwise, I think we do have some time for some questions if anybody has any questions. Again, at some point, this will be available as a recording and the slides will be available to give you more information. And always, as we said, if you have questions about a specific situation, please give us a call.
Michael, there are a couple of questions on the chat box.
I'll have to get my chat box up here. So
okay, so I'll read the questions if you want to.
I've got one here. It says, do I require to carry a photo ID every time I drive with my foreign license? To have an acceptable license in New South Wales, the license does have to include a picture on it. If your license does not include a picture, then it won't be considered a valid driving license in New South Wales. So the other issue you would also is if you have a foreign license, if that license again is not in English or it's in a different script to the Latin script, is you have to have a valid certified translation of that license that you have to carry with you. So you don't have to carry a separate photo ID. The photo has to be on your license, but if it's a foreign license that needs a translation, you do have to carry a translation with you. I'd certainly say that if you are in New South Wales and you have a foreign driver's license and you don't intend to get a New South Wales license, it would certainly be helpful to go to Services New South Wales and just get a photo ID for age purposes, because most people will use a license if they're trying to get into a club or pub or something like that, and you need to have proof of age. Many places will not accept a foreign driver's license as proof of age. So if you're not going to get a New South Wales license, do get a photo ID card from Services New South Wales. If I'm here for more than 6 months, must I apply for the Australian license, or is it optional? I would strongly advise that if you're here for more than 6 months to apply for a New South Wales license. It is not completely required, but it all depends on your situation. Most people, particularly if you're on a student visa, you're going to be here for more than 6 months. Get yourself a New South Wales driver's license, all right? Because if you do have a foreign license, that there's not necessarily an issue of having demerit points on it, and the RMS can decide to suspend your foreign license if you obtain a number of offenses traffic offenses on that license. They can suspend your foreign license and not allow you to drive. So it's important to keep in mind is that might be a situation where if you had a full New South Wales license, even if you had a couple of penalty notices, you wouldn't lose your license. But if you have a foreign license, the RMS might have a different attitude towards that. So I'd strongly recommend that if you're going to be here for more than 6 months, you get a New South Wales license. Of course, you want to check with the RMS about what's required, given what country you come from. And yeah, if it's going to be more trouble than it's worth, then you have to think about that. But I would certainly say that if you're going to be here for more than a year, definitely get yourself a license. Does it cover my medical expenses or the person I hit? I think you're talking about the green slip or CTP insurance. That covers the injuries to somebody for, the green slip. That covers for, it's third party. That means that it covers the other person's medical expenses. Now that could include if you are driving and there is a passenger in your car, that would include them also. It does not necessarily include your medical expenses if you are at fault. If you are the driver at fault, you may find that you have difficulties in making a claim against your CTP insurer. So that's an important distinction there, is not all CTP claims will be accepted for drivers if it is found that that driver is at fault. In those cases, I'd strongly advise you to get in touch with a personal injury solicitor that does motor vehicle accidents on a no-win, no-fee basis, and they can give you more advice in relation to that. Do demerit points go away after you pay the offense or after a certain period of time? It's after a certain period of time. Once you pay the offense is when the demerit points become active. All right, so you pay the offense, revenue says the offense been paid, and then the RMS then puts the demerit points on, and the demerit points will stay on your license for a period of 5 years. Okay, and after 5 years, then those demerit points come off for that offense. So if you have more offenses, so let's say that you've been driving and in a 5-year period, you've got a speeding fine for 4 points, you have an illegal U-turn for 3 points, you have a run a red light for 3 points. So there you go, you've got 10 points. You're not going to lose your license if you have a full license because you've got up to 13 points. But if those 3, let's say you got one every year, is that speeding offense will go off after 5 years. So then you still have 4 points on your license, 6 points on your license from the other 2 offenses. So it's determined by the time when the offense, the demerit points went on your license, not when you pay the fine. It's also important to keep in mind is that if you ever serve any suspension time, so when your license is suspended because of a certain offense, demerit points aren't put on your license or they're taken off your license if you serve suspension time. So people often say, drink driving. Well, you don't get demerit points for drink driving because you're disqualified from driving. So that's in lieu of demerit points. So you still are off the road, but once you're off the road, you don't have any points on your license.
Anyone has any questions, you can direct them to us after this session as well. You can follow us on social media and get in touch with us as well. If not, then we can end the session here.